Well, boys, welcome again this week to Culture Couch Live. How are you, Em, Was, Jerry?
Hey, Jezza, Was.
Good to see you all. Now, guys, we thought we might do a bit of a discussion on last week's Culture Couch because it did resonate with a lot of people. We got some really, really interesting comments. So I just want to throw that around why we feel like people resonated with that question, which is, what have you learnt from failure? And I guess from my point of view, and I might open up to you, is I guess from our point of view, we showed a little bit more of ourselves. Is that something that came through in the questions and comments this week?
Yeah, I'm looking at a lot of the comments coming back from mostly men is just around the fact that, as high performing leaders and not just us ourselves, but people in high performing positions, a lot of times they get seen as people who don't have failures, that don't have challenges. And I think, to say the humbleness of being vulnerable and exposing your rawness and issues that you've been through as a person, because we all have them, irrespective of where you sit in your career or how successful you've been in the past. You attest to this, Bruce. You talked about your sort of reaction to seeing your mum after the second grand final that you're in, but the people don't understand all that. They just think that you go on and have a successful life, and I think a lot of it gets beaten up by social media and these other things. I think that's one of the biggest challenges today with people seeing with Instagram and all these other things, seeing people have all these epic lives that point in time moments that they post online and perceive that people go through their lives without having any challenges, without any issues. And I think that's a real challenge for leaders to make sure that they expose themselves to explain that. Even myself yesterday, I turned up to a meeting and one of my staff members said, "Did you have a big night the night before?" And I was just in the meeting. I wasn't saying much. I'm usually the one who's doing the most talking. And it wasn't that at all. It's just I've been beaten up all week because of all the challenges that we've been facing during the week. And I just decided to sit back in that meeting and not take the lead and take the reins. But I wasn't necessarily mentally in the right position to be as energetic as I used to. And I think that's something that we need to ensure that the team feels comfortable in exposing themselves and ensuring they understand that we all go through challenges in our life.
I also think, and we are clearly in this space, but I also think there's a lot of labels, isn't there? And sometimes labels create a little bit of fear. We talk about vulnerability, we talk about empathy, what's culture, we talk about psychological safety. So it's probably not until we actually explain the concepts in our workshops, is it, that people start to understand exactly what they mean and there's less fear around them. So how important is that, Em, to just having a broader understanding of concepts and not locking into one little part of what that, like, for instance, if we talk about vulnerability, I don't really feel like going to work and telling everyone about my weekend, and I don't want everyone crying in the office or whatever. It's only a small part of it, but it's not until you explain the whole concept that people start to understand why it is so important to leadership.
Yeah. I mean, the word misconception I find comes out of my mouth a lot, because I think sometimes to get a better understanding, you have to kind of debunk things to what they're not. With culture, for example, I talk about parties, ping pong and perks. A lot of people think that it's around that. And I remember a leader once got up and put, culture at a big team meeting and talked about their philanthropy and the work they were doing in the community. And I'm like, I'm not really quite sure if that's it didn't make much sense in regards to how we see culture being the behaviours we accept and reward internally. So I think part of getting clarity is understanding what things aren't, so that you can create the correct definition. And sometimes people look at vulnerability as crying and spilling your guts at work, so to speak. It's a bit more about asking for help quicker and feeling okay to ask for help and feeling okay
Yeah.
Say I'm not cool with this. I haven't quite figured it out. So, and that's, I think, the role of leaders, to create that environment for that space to speak up when you're uncertain, when risk is high, and when you're potentially exposing yourself, especially socially.
I think we talk a lot about relationships, isn't it? And I suspect, guys, the reason last week's resonated, because even though we're doing it through a screen and people are watching us through a computer, or they actually feel more connected, and they start to think, oh, actually, that's interesting. I sort of loosely know who Ruzi is. I've heard about these other guys, but now I understand them more. And even that concept of relationships, Murph, it's pretty important, isn't it? And I would sort of, in a broad sense, talk about vulnerabilities. Just be yourself, because people are there to help you. But if you're not prepared to be yourself, and you're not prepared to find out what makes other people tick, it's very hard to create a really safe work environment, isn't it?
You're on mute, Jez.
Come on, mate.
How's that?
That's better.
That's better.
Was I vulnerable the way I took your feedback?
I didn't hear you.
I didn't.
To be perfectly frank, I find the whole vulnerability thing really difficult. Like, I'm probably being vulnerable by saying that. Like, my old man barely spoke to us when we were kids. You get a whack if you did something wrong, and you'd sort of wouldn't say much if you did something right. So we were brought up to be like, just get on with it. Just literally just get on with it.
Yeah. And
so I think vulnerability is different for everybody. I think exploring what it is to you, I think you said, you be yourself, I think is really important. It's been a constant struggle for me over my whole life, 50 odd years, to share enough and build that relationship with the people around me, so that they know that I care as much as I do. And I think if we can actually take the time to build those relationships and get into that safe environment, that, as Brené Brown says, take the armor off and allow yourself to have those conversations, and allow yourself for people to see you care as much as you do. And personally, I find that really hard. I'd rather make a joke than tell my brother that I love him. I've absolutely absolutely make a joke every time. So I think it's probably practice as well. What does she say, Em? Or you've read a fair bit of Brené, so I like stay awkward, and I think that's the thing, because none of us like being in that awkward space, do we? Like, it's horrible, So I think that for me, it is about relationships, but it's also about being prepared to sort of being prepared to say how you feel, even though sometimes you think, shit, how's this going to come back?
Yeah.
And I think, guys, as I said before, I think the really cool thing about when we're doing the workshop, whether it's a day or over those 4 different weeks, people start to see how it meshes together. Because you're right, if you only take one piece out of it, it becomes a little bit daunting. It's like, do I have to go to work today to be vulnerable? Like what does that look like? Today, who am I building a relationship with today? So the more natural it is, and it is going to be different for everyone, but I think Woz, and I'll maybe ask you, because your journey as a CEO, but also seeing your companies, how important is that to understand all the concepts, to be able to put this thing together, so you are creating the two things we talk about, psychological safety and a good culture, etc. And it's not easy, but it's just not one concept as it is, because then it becomes quite confronting.
I think it's just about communication. I think when you aren't communicating well, or you are acting a certain way that's not helping and supporting the best outcome of the team, there's usually a reason for it. And so I think that is about, like Emil said, it's not just about coming in and being vulnerable. It's working towards finding the solution. And a lot of times the solution is not necessarily about going in and going crazy, I need to get this done, in a reflection of my statement last week. My area of weakness, as I said before, is failure. So I go in and go crazy, but I've got to explain the reasons why I feel failure might be imminent when I'm going crazy, and how can we work through that to get to the solution. So it's just about what Em said. So being more, opening up the communication to be more solution focused. But I think I love what Jez said, because I would agree. I come from the same fatherhood, and I think our generation does, and Mill does too, where they just really lack communication, and empathy and vulnerability is just something that's just not in their DNA. So we come from that world of not having been trained to be this way, and so we're reluctant to do it. And I think that we've got to change the narrative, because
I think
it has to happen.
Picking up your point is asking for help. Like Dad would never ask for help. Like if Dad asked for help, like he'd be like, I would have gone, "Geez, there's something wrong with him." Like that's how it was. So, but and the people that ask you for help are the people that you trust the most.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a really interesting, paradox, if you like, in terms of, if Rizzy asked me for help, then I will give him help. And I listened to a podcast yesterday about palliative care, and the guy said that the transition from being well to sick to moving into the point where you're about to pass away, he said the biggest struggle people have is actually accepting help.
Yeah.
We all run around, and we're all happy to help people, but actually being prepared to say, "I need your help and I'll accept your help," is a really difficult thing. And it was quite an interesting podcast to listen to.
And I think that's the point at work too, isn't it? We don't ask for help because we think it's weak, but people are there to help us. And that's part of the frustration, I guess, that we've had probably recently with some leadership teams, et cetera, et cetera. I think you touched on it before, take your armor off, be yourself. The reason you have an executive team or team around you is just that, because we're sort of all in this together. So it is just sort of stripping away this notion of what the CEO and I had some coaches through that era, clearly, Wolsey and Parker are really, really good people, but it was very top down and it was very generational. So a lot of people are now coming into work, aren't they? Wanting to help, wanting to have a purpose. They're not just there to collect the paycheck anymore, where perhaps, when we started work, my first job was at the AMP. To be honest, I wasn't connected at all to the AMP, and I didn't care who my boss was and all that. I just give me a paycheck and I'll head to the footy club sort of thing. So it's a really good point about generational change, isn't it? People are there to help. People are there because they want to be there, so take advantage of, not take advantage of it, but strip the arm away, Murph. I think you mentioned that before.
But it's fundamental to team. The truth about it is you can't be a good team unless you are prepared to ask for help.
Yeah.
And that's what you see with all the good teams over the last few years. That everyone thinks about being vulnerable and having great relationships and all that, and that's all part of it. But the truth about it is you have to be able to ask for help, because when you do, the people around you will step up and they will support you. And that's where you get the absolute growth in the team and the organization. And so it's difficult, but
there's two things coming up for me as we're just listening there, lads. Our definition of leadership being role modeling and our fathers and parents, how much of an impact that has, but how synergistic parenthood is to leadership in any sense, sport or corporate. So, and if we want to create an environment where as a leader of people, we want to create a corporate culture where people ask for help and help each other, then the leader, it's just simply the leader. A great tactic as a leader is to actually go to their team and ask for help. And the other contributor to that is the millennial gap. Part of the reason in the research that I've read over, there's a lady, Nancy Spotton, over here that's doing some great work. And part of the problem with the generational gap is that the senior leaders don't ask the millennials for help, but the millennials want to help. Like that's the disconnection part. So it's actually met as annoying and get back in your box. And when the real smart senior leaders are actually going to them and saying, hey, what do you reckon? What do you think I should do? So that's just coming up for me.
That's just the fallacy of leadership, though, that you have to know everything. So by demonstrating that by asking for help, you're demonstrating you don't know everything, and therefore it's a sign of weakness. And so it just becomes this sort of angry ring.
And even this week's a really good example for us guys. I mean, so for people listening, put the comments on, send the questions in, because we need help as well. You know, we want to make this thing really valuable for people. We want help also. So we're reaching out to you. And as a result of particularly one particular gentleman who wrote a really cool thing on mine, we start to explore these and we start to bring them back to you. So we don't know everything either. You know, we want your help. We want your guidance. We want to know what you want to know. Tell us what's good. Tell us what's bad. So there's a really good practical example that came out of last week and us picking up on that theme of pulling the mask off, ask for help, and let's explore last week's culture couch.
Breezy, can I just finish? Oh, yeah, I can finish.
Yep.
With one thing, and that's humour. Like I love the old joke and love a bit of sarcasm and cynicism, etc., etc. But that is the killer.
Yeah.
And so not throwing in the joke, which I love doing, but withholding that is absolutely fundamental to people feeling safe.
And it happens literally, I would say 100% of the time, but let's say 90% of the time. But it happens every time we start a real talk session, doesn't it? Yeah. Every single time, humour. Every time. Now, there's degrees of the humour, but it in some ways, it's sort of become who we are as a culture. So we've got to, and I know I love your term, right time, right place, right way, Merv, because we've almost got to set the frame, guys. There's no humour at the moment. Whether that's being vulnerable with your mate. I guess the worst place to take someone for vulnerability is for a beer down the pub because the footy's on. You're having a beer. It's almost like setting the scene and then practicing. I think Murph, you mentioned before as well. So set a really safe environment. Practice it. If there is a little bit of humour, guys, pull it up. Because if we don't pull up that humour, what happens? We always miss the message, don't we?
Yeah, you're just deflecting.
You're just deflecting. No one hears the message. The person that's receiving it goes, was he serious or joking? So you actually have to pull it up there and then start again. But if you have to do that 3 or 4 times, that's okay. That's okay because that's part of creating the environment. That's part of practicing, et cetera, et cetera. So, boys, fantastic. Hopefully, we're listening, we're learning, we're pulling off some armour, whatever. And we're creating a really good environment for people to ask us questions and learn some more. So, well done, Em. Well done, Murph.
Thanks,
well done,
guys.
Woz.
That'll be the last time I become vulnerable, Ruzi.
That's humour.
Joking at the end.
I'm allowed to make a joke at the end.
That's good. That's fair. Good call.
We've finished it now.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, have a good weekend. Enjoy yourselves, and we'll catch you next week.
See you guys.